Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. We have an interesting episode today. We're going to sort of discuss this idea of Lucifer. The Lucifer Rebellion is mentioned in the Urantia papers, as well as sort of mentioned in some other works, including Drunvalo Melchizedek, who mentions a Luciferian Rebellion on Mars. And we hear this term Lucifer often and a lot. There was an episode I had posted that I had to remove. There was a discussion of Dolores Cannon, when Dolores Cannon asked in QHHT sessions whether or not there was actually a devil or Satan. They said there is not, but they did imply that there might have been something that had happened, a group of souls that was guided by Lucifer, that may have been the name of the person. And then the Urantia papers talks about the earth going through a Luciferian rebellion. So I wanted to discuss this because I've also addressed this issue in an episode from Dr. Joseph Murphy, where he talks about the meaning of Satan, the devil, and the serpent, etc., trying to confirm that it's not what you think it is. Neville Goddard explains to us that Satan is the thing that opposes us. It's the opposition. There's not an actual devil. But we can tell from the law of one material there may be a negative polarity, a group that's working in unison towards the negative. There is a duality on this earth that we're in. And it's easy oftentimes in our primitive understandings of religion to assign it to a single entity that's negative. Remember, this is simply not the case. The fall of Lucifer, as it's discussed in the Bible, begins with, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning star? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Isaiah 14:12. Now, morning star, another name given for it. Some have said it means the group of souls that chose to incarnate on the earth is the morning star. Lucifer means light, or I am, which is God. God limits himself when he becomes man. Dr. Joseph Murphy says that Lucifer falling from heaven is simply spirit, God, or I am, becoming matter, and our limitation is the so-called devil. The fall of Lucifer, which is the fall of God or spirit becoming matter, really enables us to grow and release the spiritual powers within us. These challenges and difficulties in the life sharpen our mental and spiritual tools, enabling us to discover our godlike power so that we can rise, transcend, and grow, thereby releasing more and more of God's qualities within us. Murphy says that Lucifer, mentioned in the 14th chapter of Isaiah, refers to man's false concept of God, or I am, within him. Many people are willing to die for their superstitions and false beliefs rather than to open their minds and hearts to the truths of life. They are hard, unyielding, and inflexible, and it seems to be impossible for them to give up the old, encrusted false beliefs about God and the law of life. The Bible in the 14th chapter of Isaiah refers to their intransigent and intractable attitude of mind. "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." Isaiah 14:13. Lucifer, Satan, or the devil, and Satan all mean the same thing. You've heard the story that the archangel Lucifer was cast into hell for his revolt against God. This, of course, is pure myth. The Bible refers to Lucifer as the bright and morning star. "I am the root and offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." The greatest star in all the world is the I am within you, which is God, or the light of the whole world. So to take from this, we know from the beginning there is not a Lucifer that is also the devil in the Bible. It's just referred to in that case. Things become sort of interesting when we hear the Drunvalo Melchizedek interpretation. Drunvalo Melchizedek explains that there was a Lucifer rebellion on Mars. According to Thoth, Mars looked much like Earth a little less than 1,000,000 years ago. It was beautiful. It had oceans and water and trees. It was fantastic. But then something happened in their past having to do with a Lucifer rebellion. Melchizedek says, from the very beginning of this experiment we are in, and all of God's creation is an experiment. Experiments similar to the Lucifer Rebellion, if you want to call them rebellions, have been attempted 4 times. In other words, 3 other beings besides Lucifer attempted to do the same thing, and each time it resulted in utter chaos throughout the universe. More than 1,000,000 years ago, the Martians had joined the 3rd rebellion, the 3rd time that life decided to try this experiment. And the experiment failed dramatically. Planets everywhere were destroyed, and Mars was one of them. Life attempted to create a separate reality from God, which is the same thing that's going on now. In other words, a portion of life attempted to separate itself from all other life and create its own separate reality. Since everyone is God anyway, this is okay. You can do that. The only thing is, it never has worked so far. Nevertheless, they tried it again. When people try to separate from God, they sever their love connection with reality. So when the Martians and many others created a separate reality, they cut their love bond. They discontinued the emotional body, and in so doing, they became pure male with little or no female within them. They were purely logical beings with no emotions like Mr. Spock in Star Trek. They were pure logic. What happened in Mars and in thousands of other places was that they ended up fighting all the time because there was no compassion, no love. Mars became a battleground that just kept going on and on and on until finally it became clear that Mars was not going to survive. Eventually, they blew their atmosphere and destroyed the surface of the planet. A small group of Martians tried to get away from Mars before it was destroyed, so they translated themselves into the future and found a perfect place to resettle before Mars was destroyed. That place was Earth, but it was about 65,000 years in our past. They saw that little vortex sitting on Atlantis with nobody in it. They didn't ask permission. Being part of the rebellion, they didn't go through the normal procedure. They just said, all right, let's do it. They stepped right through into the vortex and into our path. This is discussed in the Law of One material and the Quo material, where they say that a being transferred lives from Mars to Earth, and that some of us have past lives that come from Mars in this particular situation. I do believe that Melchizedek is influenced by the Urantia material. So the Urantia material is where they have a discussion of the Lucifer Rebellion. I wanted to read from the Urantia material to kind of add this to our knowledge. If it's true or not, we have channeled material from a long time ago that is discussing Lucifer from one aspect. Could be untrue, as I have discussed the Urantia book in another episode. But let's hear what they have to say. Lucifer, according to Urantia, was a brilliant primary Lananandek son of Nebadon. He had experienced service in many systems, had been a high counselor of his group, and was distinguished for wisdom, sagacity, and efficiency. Lucifer was number 37 of his order, and when commissioned by the Melchizedeks, he was designated as one of 100 most able and brilliant personalities and more than 700,000 of his kind. From such a magnificent being, through evil and error, he embraced sin and now is numbered as one of 3 system sovereigns in Nebadon who have succumbed to the urge of self and surrendered to the sophistry of spurious personal liberty, a rejection of universal allegiance and disregard of fraternal obligations, blindness to cosmic relationships. To me, that sounds like he chose the service to self path. In the universe of Nebadon, the domain of Christ Michael, there are 10,000 systems of inhabited worlds. In all the history of Lanandek's sons, in all their work throughout the thousands of systems, and at the universe headquarters, only 3 system sovereigns have ever been found in contempt of the government of the Creator's Son. Lucifer was not an ascendant being. He was a created son of the local universe, and of him it was said, "You were perfect in all your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you." Many times had he been in council with the Most High of Urantia, and Lucifer reigned upon the holy mountain of God, the administrative mount of Jerusalem, for he was the chief executive of a great system of 607 inhabited worlds. Lucifer was a magnificent being, a brilliant personality. He stood next to the Most High Fathers of the constellations in the direct line of universe authority. Notwithstanding Lucifer's transgression, subordinate intelligences refrained from showing him disrespect and disdain prior to Michael's bestowal on Urantia. Urantia is the name for Earth in the book of Urantia. One side note on Urantia, as I had indicated in a Mind Escape interview, I guess that some of the writings from Urantia and some of the creators may have been racist. I have not found this material, but it's possible that this could have some racist origins. So I'm not necessarily promoting Urantia. I'm just reading this for our own information. Lucifer is now a fallen and deposed sovereign of Satania, according to this. Self-contemplation is most disastrous, even to the exalted personalities of the celestial world. Of Lucifer, it was said, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your brightness. Your olden prophet saw his sad estate when he wrote, how are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cast down? How you dared to confuse the worlds? Very little was heard of Lucifer on Urantia, owing to the fact that he assigned his first lieutenant, Satan, to advocate his cause on your planet. Satan was a member of the same primary group of Lanondex, but had never functioned as a system sovereign. He entered fully into the Luciferian insurrection. The devil is none other than Caligastia, the deposed planetary prince of Urantia and a son of the secondary order of Lanondex. At the time, Michael was on Urantia. Michael is Jesus, as described by the Urantia book. So at the time Michael was on Urantia in the flesh, Lucifer, Satan, and Caligastia were leagued together to effect the miscarriage of his bestowal mission, but they significantly failed. Abaddon was the chief of staff of Caligastia. He followed his master into rebellion and has since acted as chief executive of the Urantia rebels. Beelzebub was the leader of the disloyal midway creatures who allied themselves with the forces of the traitorous Caligastia. The dragon eventually became symbolic representation of all these evil personages. Upon the triumph of Michael, Gabriel came down from Salvington and bound the dragon, all the rebel leaders for their misdoings. For an age of the Jerusalem seraphic rebels, it is written, and the angels who kept not their first estate but left their own habitation, he has reserved in sure chains of darkness to the judgment of the great day. Lucifer and his first assistant Satan had reigned on Jerusalem for more than 500,000 years, when in their hearts they began to array themselves against the universal Father and his then vicegerent son, Michael. There were no peculiar or special conditions in the system of Satania which suggested or favored rebellion. It is our belief that the idea took origin and form in Lucifer's mind, and he might have instigated such a rebellion no matter where he might have been stationed. Lucifer first announced his plans to Satan, but it required several months to corrupt the mind of his able and a brilliant associate. However, when once converted to the rebel theories, he became a bold and earnest advocate of self-assertion and liberty. No one ever suggested rebellion to Lucifer. The idea of self-assertion in opposition to the will of Michael and to the plans of the Universal Father, as they are represented in Michael, had its origins in his own mind. His relationship with the Creator Son had been intimate and always cordial, and at no time prior to the exaltation of his own mind did Lucifer openly express dissatisfaction about the universe administration. Notwithstanding his silence for more than 100 years of standard time, the Union of Days on Salvington had been reflectivating to Uversa that all was not at peace in Lucifer's mind. In the book, it has something called the Lucifer Manifesto, which explains whatever the early origins of trouble in the hearts of Lucifer and Satan, the final outbreak took form as the Lucifer Declaration of Liberty. 1. The reality of the Universal Father. Lucifer charged that the Universal Father did not really exist, that physical gravity and space energy were inherent in the universe, that the Father was a myth invented by the Paradise Sons to enable them to maintain the rule of the universes in the Father's name. He denied that personality was a gift of the Universal Father. He even intimated that finaltiers were in collusion with the Paradise Sons to foist fraud upon all creation, since they never brought back a very clear-cut idea of the Father's actual personality as it is discernible on Paradise. He traded on reverence as ignorance. The charge was sweeping, terrible, and blasphemous. It was this veiled attack upon the finaltiers that no doubt influenced the ascendant citizens then on Jerusalem to stand firm and remain steadfast in resistance to all the rebels' proposals. Secondly, that the universe government of the Creator's Son, Michael Lucifer, contended that the local system should be autonomous. He protested against the right of Michael, the Creator's Son, to assume sovereign of Nebadon in the name of the hypothetical Paradise Father and require all personalities to acknowledge allegiance to this unseen Father. He attacked the right of the Ancient of Days, foreign potentiates, to interfere in the affairs of local systems and universes. He talked about the attack on the universal plan of ascendant mortal training and a variety of other things. This resulted in an outbreak of rebellion. The manifesto was spread and several planetary systems went through this. Sounds to me like it was the negative confederation that we've discussed in other episodes. There's a lot to it. There's another chapter on the problems of the Lucifer Rebellion, how it took away liberty and caused injustice and a sort of time lag, that we were then placed upon the planet in a quarantine. So, I don't know what to make of it. I think it's very fascinating. Melchizedek comes back to this material when he talks about the duality of the Lucifer experiment, claiming that the words the Lucifer Rebellion carry a stigma that has haunted humankind for at least since the Bible has been on earth. Many of us human, especially Christians, believe that Lucifer is the cause of all evil and darkness that has ever transpired on this planet. We call what Lucifer did a rebellion, projecting an image that Lucifer is somehow going against the universal cosmic plan, but unity consciousness sees Lucifer's work in a slightly different light. His work is not known as rebellion, but as Lucifer's experiment. Why would it be called an experiment? Because that is exactly what it is, a test to see if certain parameters of life will work. Life is an experiment. The instructions from God at the beginning of the Lucifer experiment were for humans to live freely. But what does free will mean? Does it mean all possibilities, both good and evil? Does it mean that we would be allowed to do anything we wanted, with the idea from a biblical point of view that we would learn discrimination from the good? Life was given the ability to do anything it wanted, all possibilities. It was given free will. Therefore, how could free will exist unless consciousness created the format for this way of being? And who creates consciousness? The one and only God. Lucifer did not create free will, but it was through his actions and decisions that free will would become a reality. It was God who created Lucifer so that free will would exist. Before the Lucifer experiment, there was no free will except during the 3 other attempts. All life moved according to the will of God, according to the cosmic DNA. There were no deviations, and free will was only a potential that life could someday try. In the Law of One material, it is claimed that once we had this free will, and we had the veil, meaning that we weren't aware of the Creator, that is when this duality started to come about. At one point, because free will was possible, we realized that there was a particular way we could experience this reality that had not been tried before, so we tried it. We actually tried 3 versions of it, and each time it failed. They were absolute disasters. The latest experiment and 4th attempt, the Lucifer heading it, used a different approach to create free will. The experiment began with the angels, so it was the angels who brought this new free will consciousness to humankind, to be lived here in these dense worlds, and life everywhere watched to see how it would flare. With great respect between 2 brothers, the battle between good and evil began. It was a battle to the death, yet neither could die. It was a battle that had to be, for it was the will of God. For the overall sake of the universe, Michael supported the side of light and the good, and Lucifer backed the side of darkness and evil. A new possibility was about to be lived, and we humans thought it was a great idea, this idea of free will. Lucifer was so intelligent that he knew how the universe was created. He knew the images, the patterns, and codes that created the universe. But in order to be greater than God, he decided that he would have to separate from God. As long as he was part of God, he could no longer go beyond him. So evidently, with God's blessing, since God created him, Lucifer started on a great experiment to see what could be learned by creating in a different way from how God had made the original creation. He severed the love bonds between himself and God and created a Merkaba field that was not based on love. Because once he severed the love between himself and God, he could no longer make a living Merkaba. Archangel Lucifer and many other angels started on this great experiment to see what could be learned. In this new way, as we said, similar experiments had actually been tried 3 times before by other beings, but those experiments had ended in massive destruction and pain for everyone involved. Many planets had been completely destroyed, including one in our own solar system, Mars. But Lucifer was retrying this old experiment with a new method. So he severed the love bonds between himself and God and created a Merkaba field that was not based on love. What he did was make an interdimensional time-space machine that we call a spaceship. This flying object, sometimes seen as a flying saucer, but also many other shapes, was more than just a vehicle as we think of it. Much more. It could not only move throughout the spectrum of the multidimensional reality, but it could create realities that seemed to be just as real as the original creation. It is similar to what we are now calling virtual reality, only this was a virtual reality that could not be distinguished from the real thing. So Lucifer made this synthetic Merkaba to create a reality separate from God so that he could ascend to the heights and be just as good as God, at least in his own mind. He couldn't be God, but he could be like God, his hero. In order to convince the other angels that this experiment was necessary, he chose a different pathway out of the great void to create his synthetic reality that was unique unto itself. Timothy Wiley, in his book, The Return of the Rebel Angels, the Urantia Mysteries, talks about this further, stating, the Lucifer Rebellion, which took place 203,000 years ago and which so severely affected life on this and 36 other worlds, has been reconciled. This revolution among the angels, who most directly care for us mortals, has been directly responsible for the deplorable state of this world for almost as long as human history. The reconciliation of this rebellion, so the angels told us, would start a process by which the world will be transformed and uplifted over the course of our lifetimes. The Urantia book, which may contain fallacies, still may be one of the deeper understandings of the dynamics of the Lucifer Rebellion coming from the collective unconsciousness. It should be kept in mind when reading this description that the celestial communications describing the rebellions are speaking on behalf of the very authorities against whom Lucifer was rebelling and therefore need to be forgiven for what we are some thoroughly unforgiving attitudes. Perhaps the Urantia document is coming from their Urantia people, and maybe it's something different. Wiley exclaims that he's learned that the world, along with a handful of planets whose angelic overseers identified with the Lucifer Rebellion, is better regarded as a cosmic experiment. We have been quarantined and isolated from the rest of the multiverse for more than 200,000 years, forced to try to work out planetary life without the benefit of knowing who we really are or our place in the multiverse. In a local universe of 10 million inhabited worlds, I believe some extraterrestrials refer to this world as being third to the worst. In other words, the third to the most emotionally, psychically, and physically dense of the frequency domains within our primary dimension. Arcturian ETs refer to this as being currently a third density world that is moving up to fourth density. Ra does as well. Yet dealing with this level of density allows those of us here to experience duality in its most extreme form. When we die and leave our physical vehicles, it is to move into another body vibrating within a slightly higher density or frequency domain, as we've discussed before. Wiley makes the argument that the whole Lucifer experiment was a good thing, and it helped us actually grow in our connection to love. Perhaps we have been separated from love. I don't think that's what's happened on Earth. It happened on Mars, and there's a Luciferian influence on what we're experiencing, a sort of anti-love sort of idea, if that makes any sense. So, after all the turmoil created by the rebellion, there was a conflict between the angels. Human beings were never involved, but there was a conflict between the angels. There's a feeling that there's some sort of thought war. There's a thought war that's discussed in the Law of One material, but there's a discussion in the Bible of the battle of these angels. I wish I understood it, but it's something that fascinates me. I don't think we'll ever know the answer, but it's been discussed in a number of these materials, and I wanted to just give a brief review of what we'd heard so far. It's a part of human nature. And if it's a part of human nature, it's a part of angelic nature. The people are going to rebel, to be opposed, to question authority. Who knows what the workings of this are? Perhaps Lucifer is nothing more than just a name that's given in the Bible. Perhaps when the Lucifer Rebellion was described in Urantia, it was coming from a biblical understanding, some hopeful person wanting to explain what they thought in their mind in a different way or different manner. Who knows what's going on? But there seems to be a misinterpretation of it, this idea that there are demons. Perhaps there are demons. I don't know if they're related to Lucifer. I don't think the Bible really clearly indicates that, and a lot of disinformation is given among religious circles. All I know is that we are all one. You're going to see duality in everything. That's what this planet is created around. You're supposed to see it with the sun and the moon, the night and the day, female and male. It's bred into us by our very genetics. Everything has two sides. There's two sides to the coin. So perhaps there's good and evil. Perhaps these opposing forces have been what creates who you are today. But transcending it is the key, for we are all one. We are one people. And when you encounter evil, you're encountering it within yourself. If you encounter some evil presence, that evil presence is you, sometime in the future coming back, who knows? So you need to love it. The power of love is so powerful, it is able to overcome any resistance. So philosophically, we understand this duality. But my question is beyond that. Was there some sort of historical significance to this Lucifer Rebellion? That I will never know. I honestly don't think the Lucifer Rebellion is properly described in the Urantia papers, but maybe. And it's described enough. When Drunvalo Melchizedek is discussing it, he's taking some of that from there and perhaps something more to it. Perhaps Jesus created Lucifer for this rebellion, and that is all part of his own master plan, as we are all one. And understanding this, we're a part of this plan. We're going through it, and it's cool. We're a part of something different in our creation, in this universe, and we're right now in it. We're experiencing it. People will look back and say, wow, you were there. Just like a great movie that you saw on opening night, or some great concert, or something else. You were there. You were there when this happened. And we are all growing as a universe, spiritually, from our experiences through this duality, and overcoming it, and understanding what the self is, and how to help others, the importance of love, and what love means. All of these things are a part of this lesson. I can't say whether I believe it or not, but I wanted to share it as a part of what we've been discussing so far. Are we living on a planet that's been decimated by what is called the Lucifer Rebellion? Was it, in biblical terms, just an angel that left heaven? Or was it in something greater, somebody that controlled many planets and decided to rebel against the higher authority? What does it mean for you? Does it affect our free will? Are these things that have affected us? Because they might have, or it could all be just ridiculous. We'll never know, but we do know for sure that we live in this beautiful, wonderful creation with so much diversity to it, and that something happened, and something might be a part of it. And this is something we can just add to our arsenal of understandings. There is not a single satanic demon that's sitting in a chair below you, tempting you individually all the time, pulling you. There may be negative influences. You've had negative influences your whole life, in your school, in your town, in your city. But those are things you attracted to you, perhaps to make spiritual lessons easier to understand. Oftentimes when I do episodes like this, I get comments that are like, I have experienced the most incredible evil, and there is no doubt there are demons and Satan. I've met them. And I say to you, I don't doubt you. I'm trying to understand what that means. Is there evil demons? What does it mean? Is there a history behind it all? Is there something else going on? That's my biggest thing. I always feel like there's a lot more that we don't know, that we've been given children's stories, the very complex stories that we don't understand. That's what I want to understand. I want to know the truth. Obviously, we'll never know the truth, but it's important to discuss this stuff, especially when this idea of Lucifer is used to manipulate people on a regular basis. So who knows what this really means? In any case, I'd love to get your impressions. Do you know about Lucifer? What is your impressions of the Lucifer mythology? Was there a Lucifer Rebellion? And is Lucifer God? All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.